Rosalinda V. Terona. Career Ambassador, Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Republic of the Philippines to New Delhi, India, 1986-1988. Yangon, Myanmar, 1990 to 1993. Bangkok, Thailand, 1993-1995. And concurrently accredited to Lao PDR and Cambodia. Vietnam, 1995-1998. Nairobi, Kenya, 2002 to 2005. And other East and Central Africa countries. President, University of Pasig City, 2008 to 2012. Diplomacy Counselor, Colombo Plant Staff College, 2007 to 2008. Trustee, ISS Philippine, 2007 to 2012. Advisor, Transparency International, 2008 to 2010. Overall Choir, Search Committee, Towns Award 2007, Vice President of Towns Foundation, 2007. National Advisor, 14F Philippine, 2011 to 2012. Assistant Secretary, UNIO DFA, 1981 to 1986. Executive Director, ASEAN National Secretariat of the Philippines. Secretary General, DFA Law of the Sea Secretariat. And currently, the Advisor of Kapisanan ng Kamag-anak ng mga Migranteng Manggagawang Pilipino Incorporated, Kakampi. Kalinga sa iyong pag-alis at pagbalik. Tuwing Webes, alas 2 hanggang alas 3 ng hapon. Hosted by Ambassador Rosalinda Terona at Fe Nicodemus.
Magandang araw sa lahat ng ating mga minamahal na tagapakinig at nanonood sa ating programa. Ngayon po ay nasa labas ang aking co-anchor na si Fe Nicodemus, but siguro magkakaroon tayo ng pagkakataon na siya ay makausap ngayong araw na ito. So marami po tayong mga issues na naiwan nung mga nakaraang sessions natin at susubukan natin na yun ay ipagpatuloy at tutukan dahil sa napaka-importante po yung mga issues na yon. Actually, ang burning issue ngayon is yung ang migration is the phenomenon of the 21st century. At ito po ay napaka-importanting issue para sa Pilipinas because the Philippines happens to be until recently the largest migrant country in the whole world because there are some 8 to 10 million Filipinos all over the world working, essentially contributing not only to the development of the Philippines by way of their foreign remittance, but they are also contributing to the development of their host countries and in general to the development of the world. At atin pong binibigyang diin itong draft convention ng ASEAN composed of the 10 countries, Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Lao PDR, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, and Vietnam on anti-trafficking. Ito po ay draft proposal ng Philippines because we have always been considered to be the leader in the advancement of the rights of migrants and also the leader in mobilizing the contributions of migrants not only to the development of countries in the world, but I'd like to emphasize at this point that we cannot really separate the issue of development from the issue of peace, so that migration should always be taken into in the context of peace and development. Pag sinabi po nating peace, hindi lang po yung absence of war, kasi yung peace ngayon has a different meaning in the context of security. Peace, ibig sabihin natin ngayon ay freedom from so many things. Freedom from ignorance, freedom from HIV, AIDS, freedom from poverty, and so forth and so on. So, napakalaking bagay po nitong role o contribution ng ating mga migranteng Filipino. So, ito pong draft ASEAN Convention on Trafficking in Persons is likely to be approved kasi po itong draft na ito ay base po ito sa United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Suppression of Trafficking in Persons. So, more or less po ay pareho po ito ng United Nations Convention. The only difference is that binigyan po natin ito ng kahulugan in the context of ASEAN regional cooperation. So ito po ang mga pledges at commitment ng mga ASEAN countries na kung ito ay maaprubahan, and I said it is likely to be approved, it is likely to be unanimously approved, which means to say na lahat po ng boto ay pabor, ay ma-reinforce po yung United Nations Convention on the prevention and suppression of trafficking in persons, at saka po ay siguro ma-eliminate natin o ma-eradicate natin itong problema na ito in the ASEAN region. Na-discussion po natin yung the measures, and there were 11 measures recommended by the Philippines in preventing trafficking in persons. Nandito na po tayo sa protection of victims of trafficking in persons, at sinasabi natin po dito, the bottom line is kung ano po ang pinapayagan ng local laws or local laws or domestic laws. But we must also view it from the point that magkakabit po yung local at saka international law eh. In fact nga po, kung tayo po ay naging signatory or contracting party to an international convention or an international agreement, it becomes part and parcel of the law of the land because that is provided for by our Constitution. So ang root po to a certain extent ng domestic or national laws are the principles of international law. Dito po sa protection of victims of trafficking in persons na tayo, at sinasabi po ng Philippine proposal, and I'd like to speak, always pursue the Philippine position. Parang naalala ko po nung sinabi ni Ninoy Aquino that the Filipinos are worth dying for. Sinabi din po ni President Cory Aquino na she thanks God for making her a Filipino. Ako naman po kasi I drew inspiration from these statements na gusto kong sabihin at this point that if I were to be born again, I'd like to be born a Filipino, still a Filipino. Dito po sa protection of victims of trafficking in persons, in appropriate cases and to extent possible under its domestic law, each state party, meaning to say each ASEAN state party, shall protect the privacy and identity of victims of trafficking in persons, including inter alia, by making legal proceedings relating to such trafficking. Kasi when we speak of peaceful law, importante po yung human rights or human dignity. So kaya po yung mga victims ng trafficking of persons ay hindi po yun ina-identify kasi kung i-identify po sila ay mawawalan po sila ng dignidad. Kasi, you know, that trafficking is a crime against humanity. It is a heinous crime against humanity. Parang mawawala na ang buong pagkatao nung biktima na yon kung siya ay ma-identify. So, under this draft ASEAN Convention, hindi po dapat na i-identify ang mga victims. Their identity should remain perpetually, meaning to say forever, confidential. It also says in this particular portion of the convention, the ASEAN Convention, each state party shall consider implementing measures to provide for the physical, psychological, and social recovery of victims of trafficking in persons, including in appropriate cases in cooperation with non-governmental organizations, other relevant organizations, and other elements of civil society. Dito po sa particular na recovery for the victims of trafficking, napakalaki po ng role na pwedeng gampanan ng mga civil society organizations. Civil society organizations po, kaparis ng simbahan, kaparis din po ng mga, we should also include the academe. Pwede din po na yung media go into this, the private and the business organizations, they can play a special role in the physical, psychological, and social recovery of victims. So that yung sinasabi natin, which is now very much in fashion and which is in practice all over the world, yung PPP po is the answer to this. The cooperation between the public and the private sectors, or which we call public-private partnerships. Ito po ay ina-apply na nating gobyerno, and I foresee this is going to be very effective because there are things which the government cannot do anymore because of the limited resources, which can be better accomplished or achieved by the private sector. But the private sector cannot move without the guidance, without the policy directives coming from the government. So kailangan po ng kooperasyon dyan at kailangan po ng very close and strict coordination so that the public and the private sector do not work at cross purposes. Sila po ay nagtutulungan, hindi sila nagko-compete. Ito po din sinasabi dito, each Asian state party shall take into account in applying the provisions of this article the age, gender, and special needs of victims of trafficking in persons, to particular the needs of children, including appropriate housing, education, and care. So there is a special mention here for the needs of children, kasi very special, very vulnerable po itong tropa na ito, itong grupo na ito, and to a certain extent, very marginalized. So sinasabing, tignan natin ang edad, tignan natin yung gender o kasarian, at tignan natin yung pangangailangan ng special needs or protection ng mga biktima. So, in putting up a recovery program, or putting up a protection program, kasi itong article na ito does not only speak of protection but protection in the sense that kailangan din na, if they have been victimized, hindi na protection in times of being victimized, but I think it is more of helping them recover from being victims. So yun po ay, again, I think will require cooperation, at yung regional approach po dito, na sinasabi yung 10 bansa ng Association of Southeast Asian Nations can help each other, for example, by exchange of information or by exchange of best practices, how to handle this issue of protection and this issue of giving the victims physical, psychological, and social recovery programs. Sinasabi din dito sa article na ito that each Asian state party shall endeavor to provide for the physical safety of victims of trafficking in persons while they are within its territory. So, before they are repatriated or before they return to their homeland, kailangan po kung nasaan po sila doon, the receiving country in particular, should ensure that they are protected while they are being prepared for return and reintegration into their countries of origin. Sinasabi din po dito sa artikulo na ito na each Asian party shall ensure that its domestic legal system contains measures that offer victims of trafficking in persons the possibility of obtaining compensation for damage suffered. Ito ay ang example na very popular example at nakakalungkot na example ay yung ating mga comfort women during the Second World War. Okay, sila ay naabuso na sobra-sobra. Pagkatapos sila sa pagkaabuso nila, eventually naging mahirap na sila dahil sa naapektuhan yung kanilang psychological setup, ang kanilang physical makeup and so forth and so on. So siguro kung yung damage na yun ay makompensate, ay makakatulong ng malaki sa sinasabi nating physical, psychological, and social recovery. So, dapat ho ito ay, again, hindi na siguro ito dapat pinupolitika, dapat ito ay parang part and parcel na po ito ng generally accepted principles of international law which should be followed by all countries. Whether large or small, whether rich or poor, and so forth and so on. Lalo na nga po yung mga nationals o citizens ng mga mahihirap at maliliit na bansa. So, kung meron po kayong tanong so far sa ating itong lecture na ito, kasi po yung ASEAN Convention on Trafficking of Persons ay napaka-broad at napaka-comprehensive, covering all the issues which are within the generic heading of trafficking of persons. Pwede po kayong magpadala ng inyong tanong o kung gusto nyo ng point of clarification, etc. Pwede nyo ipadala dito sa aming radio, sa aming channel, Kakampi Online, at nasusubukan po natin at sasagutin natin ng to the best we can. Having touched upon the issue of prevention and protection, ang susunod na po nating issue ay on the issue of repatriation and return of victims. Okay? Marami pong sinasabi dito ang ASEAN Convention at isa-isahin natin na ipaliwanag. Ang una pong sinasabi dito, the party of which a victim is a national or in which that person had the right of permanent residence at the time of entry into the territory of the receiving party shall, with due regard for his or her rights, safety and dignity, facilitate and accept his or her return without undue or unreasonable delay. For example po, kung ang naging biktima ng trafficking ay isang Pilipino at ang Pilipino na ito ay let's say ito lang naman po ay halimbawa, hindi naman po sinasabi na totoo kasi hindi natin gustong masaktan. We do not want to point fingers here. We follow the principle of no impunity. We are only pursuing this subject in the context of advocacy and generating awareness and consciousness. Halimbawa lang po nang galing yung Pilipino naging biktima sa isang bansa na hindi na muna natin sasabihin, siya'y Pilipino, dapat po na tumulong ang dalawang party dito para sa akin, hindi lang yung receiving party, tumulong din yung the country of origin such as the Philippines to facilitate the safe and dignified return of the victim without undue or unreasonable delay. So, ngayon po, very important component na po nitong mga kontrata ng mga manggagawa natin, ng mga migrante natin na nagtatrabaho sa ibang bansa, na yung question of repatriation, first of all, should be a duty of the receiving state. The point of repatriation should be a duty of the receiving state. Pero din po, kung kailangan, depende sa pagkakaibigan, the friendship and cooperation with the Philippines as the country of origin, siguro mapapadali po ito ang repatriation nila or the return to the Philippines. Kasi the more we delay or the more we protract, the more we prolong the return, baka lalo pong ma-aggravate yung problema. So, importante po yung facilitation na sila ay makabalik agad, with dignity and in an environment of safety. Ang susunod po ditong sinasabi is, when a party returns a victim to another state, such return shall be with due regard to the rights, safety, and dignity of that person, and for the status of any legal proceedings related to the fact that the person is a victim, and shall preferably be voluntary. Kung pwede, paano ito? Kung ayaw umuwi nung biktima, pero hindi natin actually mapupuwersa yon kasi sinasabi ditong with due regard for the rights, safety, and dignity. Kung yung biktima po ay, let's say, Filipino uli, baka siya ay natatakot umuwi, baka kung anong mangyari sa kanya, ma-persecute siya, o it could place his life in danger, baka maaring ayaw niya umuwi at would rather stay. Nandoon na po yun sa legal proceedings kung ano ang dapat maging mangyari. But preferably yung pag-uwi po ng biktima, yung repatriation or return ng biktima shall be voluntary. Dito din po sinasabi, at the request of a receiving party, a requested party shall verify whether a person is its national or had the right of permanent residence in its territory at the time of entry into the territory of the receiving party. So, ang ibig sabihin po nito ay hindi naman po basta-basta na yung Philippines tatanggapin itong repatriation o return ng isang tao na hindi na-verify na siya ay citizen ng Philippines, siya ay nakatira dito sa Philippines, ay lumabas lang siya diyan at nagpunta sa ibang bansa para siya ay magtrabaho. Meron din pong process na i-identify yun. This is also in terms of what you call yung the proper immigration, the proper migration proceedings which are really embodied in a set of laws. Yun din po sinasabi dito, in order to facilitate the return of a victim who is without proper documentation, the party of which that person is a national or in which he or she had the right of permanent residence at the time of entry into the territory of the receiving party shall agree to issue, at the request of the receiving party, such travel documents or other authorization as may be necessary to enable the persons to travel to and to return. Ito po ang gagampanan na role ng ating mga embassies at ang mga consulates kasi hindi nga naman po pwedeng mag-travel yung biktima ng trafficking kung wala siyang proper travel documents. Maswerte na kung mayroong travel documents, kung yan ay nag-expire, i-renew na lang, ay kung nawala ay kailangan mag-issue ng bagong travel documents. At kung pwede, kasi nga dapat yung repatriation or return should be without undue delay or it must be within reasonable time, yung reactivate o pag-issue din ng mga travel documents ng ating mga pasuguan or embassies and consulates should also be done within minutes, I suppose, kasi every minute lost is lost forever and it can, as I said, amount to some kind of aggravated situation or more problems. Ano ka sasabihin? Hindi pa. Ang susunod dito, sinasabi ay, each party shall adopt such legislative or other measures as may be necessary to establish repatriation programs involving relevant national or international institutions and non-governmental organizations. Tayo po meron na po tayong I presume meron na tayong model repatriation programs. Ang Department of Foreign Affairs po, alam kong meron silang repatriation programs. Pero dapat po yung repatriation program ng DFA is in consultation, we have a Philippine repatriation program to which the relevant agencies of the government and even the non-governmental organizations have duly contributed. Parang binabari lang natin po ito, the general principles are there, and then ina-apply lang po natin to on a case-to-case basis depending where the repatriation begins or where the repatriation shall begin to take place, and that is from a receiving country. Ito namang sinasabi natin, itong sinasabi dito sa kahuli-hulihang article, the second to the last article on the question of repatriation and return. It says here, this article shall be without prejudice to any rights afforded to victims of trafficking in persons by any domestic laws of the receiving state. In other words, kung meron pong binibigay na benepisyo ang country of origin, ay ang receiving state to which the repatriation will begin to take place, okay lang po yun. Ang mas makakabuti doon sa biktima ng trafficking, lalong dapat bigyan ng acceptance o pabor. Parang sinasabi natin na, of course, kung may mga ibang merong ibibigay na financial package or technical package or any package, a shelter package or a basic needs package, you'd see to be given by any domestic law of the receiving state, pwede po yun without prejudice. Dapat ang sinabing iba, without prejudice, that should be allowed by the domestic law of the national law of the country of origin. Ang kahuli-hulihan pong article dito ay sinasabing, this article shall be without prejudice to any applicable bilateral or multilateral agreement or arrangement that governs in whole or in part the return of victims of trafficking in persons. Kasi po ito ay convention that is going to be applicable to the 10 countries. But it is possible na merong bilateral agreement, let's say, between the Philippines and Malaysia, between the Philippines and Indonesia, and so forth and so on, between, let's say, Vietnam, Laos, PDR, and Cambodia, ay yun po ang dapat po itong convention na ito should not conflict with these bilateral or multilateral agreements on the same subject, should not conflict. But as much as possible, this convention, this ASEAN Convention on Trafficking, should be consistent. Kasi po nauna na po yung mga bilateral at multilateral agreements na yon, at marami na pong aral at leksyon na natutunan from the application of this bilateral and multilateral agreements on trafficking. At dapat po yan ay maging aral din na dapat mapapaloob dito sa ASEAN Convention na ito on Trafficking in Persons. Siguro very extensive ang ginagawa nating consultations among the ASEAN countries para the principle of consistency is adhered to or is upheld. Again, kung meron po kayong tanong dito sa portion na ito, repatriation and return of victims, pwede pong sabihin nyo sa amin at we will try to clarify. But next time, pagdating dito po ni Fe Nicodemus, siguro kailangan yung bawat article nitong ASEAN Convention on Trafficking na ito ay mabigyan natin ng concrete or practical cases. Hindi lang po tayo nagsasalita tungkol sa batas, pero nagsasalita tayo from experience. Sinasabi ko nga po time and again that experience is not the best teacher, but experience is the only teacher. So pupunta na po ngayon ako to another subject, law enforcement and prosecution. Law enforcement and prosecution. So natapos natin yung prevention, protection, repatriation, and return. Nasa fourth issue na tayo, law enforcement and prosecution. Sinasabi po dito sa draft convention ng ASEAN, each ASEAN party shall adopt such measures as may be necessary to ensure that persons or entities are specialized in the fight against trafficking and the protection of victims. Kaya po yung training, importante po ito. Training at saka consultations, napaka-importante po ito para kasi you have to build capacity for not only individuals but for organizations or institutions that are engaged in the specialized fight against trafficking and the protection of victims. Dapat merong formal training at formal aral dito po sa managing the fight, the battle, the struggle against trafficking, and managing, the protection of victims. Siguro po, the International Organization for Migration should look into this area. Now they are into labor management. They're looking at managing the process of recruiting, the recruiting agencies. Pero importante siguro na ma-strengthen yung building capacity for persons and entities that are especially engaged against the fight versus trafficking and the protection of the victims, na sila po ay talagang alam nila, maging eksperto sila kasi pagka ma-mishandle at saka ma-mismanage yung dalawang bagay na yan, ay baka mag-backlash o mag-boomerang, sabi nga sa Australia. Imbis na mag-move forward, for positive consequences, baka lalo pang maraming problema ang maidulot dahil sa hindi po prepared at hindi tayo marunong. Halimbawa, kung ikaw ay pulis, hindi ka pwede maging pulis, hindi ka pala marunong humawak ng batuta at saka ng baril. At saka kung ikaw ay nagpo-promote ka, let's say, ng RH bill, hindi mo naman pala alam yung mga gamit ng mga facilities, anyway, importante po yung training, and it must be formal training. Siguro po yung United Nations Center on Crime Prevention, which is located in Vienna, ay pwedeng tumulong dito in the training of persons and entities, that they should get special education in the fight against trafficking, and back to back po itong struggle, fight against trafficking, and the protection of victims. Hindi lang in the fight against trafficking, dapat po yung training also in the protection, but to me that is more important, protection of victims. Susunod po dito sa law enforcement and prosecution provision, it says, each ASEAN party shall adopt such measures as may be necessary to ensure coordination of the policies and actions of the governments, departments, and other public agencies against trafficking in persons where appropriate, through setting up of coordinating bodies. Dito po sa Philippines, itong coordinating body na ito, and I recall many years ago na tayo po ang nakaimbento nitong interagency committee na ito, na tinatawag natin ngayon, noon ARIAT ang tawag dyan ngayon ang tawag dyan IACAT. You see, kailangan po ay yung, as I said, a strong, close-knit coordination among the relevant agencies and institutions. Pero po, yung IACAT na ngayon, tinignan ko, may medyo mahina po yung participation ng CSOs, kasi po dapat bigyan din ng strong participation ng CSOs dito sa interagency, kasi we are now going into PPP. This is the trend nowadays. Kaya kailangan po dapat pinapalakas din natin yung involvement at saka participation ng non-governmental organizations o the so-called CSOs. Parang sa ganitong pagkakataon ay while the government is providing the policy directives, but the government will also depend on the CSOs and the NGOs in the implementation of the policy directives. Time out muna po daw kasi iinom muna ako ng a glass of water. Pero napaka-interesting po ito. Sana po yung cooperation, the mutually reinforcing relationship between the public and the private sector ay mobilized to the hilt in the struggle against trafficking and in the protection of victims.
Lumalaki ang pamilya, kailangan mas malaking bahay. Umaasenso, kailangan mas magandang bahay. Kailangan pag-ibig.
May magandang balita ang pag-ibig. Dinoble ng pag-ibig ang housing loan nyo. Ngayon, 6 million na. Mula sa dating 3 million, na doble sa 6 million. At ang interest rate, ang baba na. Higit sa 30% ang ibinaba. Kasabay nyo ang pag-ibig sa pagganda ng inyong buhay.
Sa pag-ibig, ang pinaghirapan may katuparan.
Lots of people die of AIDS-related complications every day.
And LDR is a chance for you to inherit that dreaded infection.
Let's be knowledgeable of it. In every single decision that we make, there's always a consequence.
Let's not be tempted. Rather, we must task ourselves to secure our own health, not only for us, but also for our loved ones, especially those OFWs outside our country.
We should sustain this good health and be cautious in what is the right path to travel.
We need to know the consequences of this epidemic infection because it can harm not only a few, but a lot.
No more time for slender minds. We must get up for a better prospect.
Tuloy pa rin ang larga sa ibang bansa para kumita. Kaya't sa aking bawat padala, sa I-remit ng may tiwala, sa I-remit ay sigurado ka, aabot ang pagmamahal mo sa kanila. Kaya't mag-I-remit, I-remit, may ngiti sa bawat padala. I-remit, I-remit, mag-I-remit. Mahirap man ang nag-iisa, dahil sa'kin sila'y umaasa. Okay na rin, titiisin, buhay namin ay pagpalain. Kaya't sa aking bawat padala, sa I-remit ng may tiwala, sa I-remit ay sigurado ka, aabot ang pagmamahal mo sa kanila. Kaya't mag-I-remit, I-remit, may ngiti sa bawat padala. I-remit, I-remit, mag-I-remit.
Hello, nandito naman po ako muli. At siguro kailangan tapusin natin if we can itong draft ASEAN Convention against trafficking persons. So, kung again, meron po kayong tanong dito sa Law Enforcement and Prosecution Chapter, please let us know. Pero gusto ko din pong sabihin at this point, yung kahuli-huling prinsipyo in this regard. Each ASEAN party shall provide or strengthen training for relevant officials in the prevention and fight against trafficking in persons with focus on methods used in preventing trafficking, methods in preventing trafficking, investigating and prosecuting the traffickers, and protecting the rights of the victims, including protecting the victims from the traffickers. Ulitin ko po, medyo bigat itong sinasabi. Each ASEAN party shall provide or strengthen training for regional officials in the prevention of and fight against trafficking in persons, with focus on methods used in preventing trafficking, investigating and prosecuting the traffickers, and protecting the rights of the victims, including protecting the victims from the traffickers. And so this is the reason why we have been trying to invite the Executive Director of the Philippine Center for Transnational Crime, si General Serapio po, kasi alam ko na itong Philippine Center na ito ay they have expertise, at least to let us know on the methodologies used in the prevention of trafficking, in investigating and prosecuting the traffickers, and protecting the rights of the victims. Parang in a holistic, coherent and integrated fashion, meron silang programa dito eh. So later on, we are hoping to bring to you General Felizardo Serapio, who is the Executive Director of the Philippine Center on Transnational Crimes. So you have 3 points there to recap: law enforcement and prosecution. First, measures to ensure that the persons and entities are especially equipped in the fight against trafficking and the protection of victims. Second, that there should be strong and close coordination among the relevant agencies concerned in the fight and the protection. And third, it's quite important to develop some generally accepted methods in the prevention, investigation, and prosecution of traffickers. Parang standards na naman, standard na po ito kasi meron na po tayong sinasabing international benchmarks. So, yung kailangan lang daw po dito, the political will, I think, to implement these procedures, to implement these principles, and to ensure to penalize those who have violated the relevant laws, that they should get the just punishment for what they have done. But trafficking, as I always want to mention, is one of the most serious, it's a heinous crime that deserves to have a heavy penalty. Nandito na po tayo sa next article, mutual legal assistance in criminal matters. And MLAT ang sinasabi dito, MLAT, when it comes in the form of a treaty, Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, MLAT, in criminal matters. And it says here, the parties shall, in conformity with their respective domestic laws, afford the widest measure of assistance in connection with investigation of criminal proceedings brought in respect of the offenses covered in Article 2 of this convention. So, kailangan po, ang sinasabi dito, ang key words here, widest measure of assistance in connection with investigation or criminal proceedings. One of the implications or symptom of this widest measure of assistance, I would not say measure of assistance, kasi assistance parang ang isa mataas, ang isa mababa. Siguro kung hindi pa dito natatapos one possible amendment here, afford the widest measure of either cooperation or mutual support in connection with investigation or criminal proceedings. Kasi po yun is more consistent with the principle of sovereignty, or it means that regardless of status of countries or states, they are equal before international law. The next part of this article on mutual legal assistance says, The parties shall, where they are parties to the Treaty on Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters done in Kuala Lumpur on 29 November 2004, carry out their obligations under paragraph 1 of this article in conformity with the treaty. So we have to have a cross-reference. Article 1, the article under paragraph 1 of this article. What is the paragraph 1 of this article is sinasabi na in conformity with their respective domestic laws afford the widest measure of assistance. So this is for the MLAT, and there is an MLAT for ASEAN which was concluded in Kuala Lumpur on 29 November 2004. The Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters is the title of this treaty. So now we go to the issue of extradition. Siguro ang susunod, I'm not quite aware whether extradition treaties are normally bilateral agreements. But I'm not a lawyer, but I was just toying with an idea if there was this MLAT, which was done in Kuala Lumpur. So I think extradition is on a country to country, on a state to state basis. But the principles of extradition in these bilateral agreements between the ASEAN countries are embodied in Article 10 of the proposed or the draft ASEAN Convention on Trafficking in Persons, and it says, the ASEAN party in the territory of which the alleged offender is present shall, in cases to which this convention applies, or if it does not extradite that person, be obliged without exception whatsoever, and whether or not the offense was committed in its territory, to submit the case without undue delay, to its competent authorities for the purpose of prosecution through proceedings in accordance with the domestic laws of that party. So ang ibig sabihin po nito na whether the crime of trafficking was committed in this particular state or not, pagka naka-discover po sila ako naka-detect ng ganyan na kaso, that case should be brought immediately or without undue delay to the relevant judicial body of that party. Maaring yung tao na yun ay hindi naman siya national nung bansa where he was where he was found, or he was coming from another country, but the point is na nandun siya, nakilala siya, na-identify siya, na siya ay trafficker. He should be brought before the bar of justice of that party without delay. Those authorities shall take the decision in the same manner as in the case of any other offense or of a grave nature under the domestic laws of that party. So not only trafficking of persons, baka trafficking of illicit, traffic of arms, baka drug trafficking, etc., or other comparable offenses of the same gravity. It also says under the article on extradition, the offenses covered in Article 2 of this convention shall be deemed to be included as extraditable offenses in any extradition treaty existing between any of the parties before the entry into force of the convention. The parties undertake to include such offenses. Extraditable, binabalik, exchange, yeah, no exchange. Extraditable offenses in every extradition treaty to be subsequently concluded between them. when a party which makes extradition conditional on the existence of a treaty receives a request for extradition from another party with which it has no extradition treaty, the requested party may, at its options and its conformity with its domestic laws, consider this convention as a legal basis for extradition in respect of the offense covered in Article 2 of this convention. Ibig sabihin po nito kung sana na ang trafficking should be automatically or mandatorily considered as extraditable offense. Sana. Pero kasi nga it depends on the sovereignty of the countries or the states. So it's really up to them to make this ASEAN Convention on Trafficking a legal basis for extradition of traffickers. Sana, you know, that it is not inconsistent with the domestic laws of the ASEAN countries that they should make trafficking a compulsory extraditable offense. Sana. Yeah, because it depends a whole lot on the content of the domestic or national laws. Dapat meron na a UN convention normally precedes a national law or a domestic law. Parang the enabling law passed by the different countries or the different states are in implementation of its commitment under international agreements or international conventions. Pero dito, after you have already an enabling law, sana yung enabling law has the foresight o sana na ilagay doon. I have not really, must confess, examined the anti-trafficking law of the Philippines. Sana nilagay, and of course it must be contained in the domestic or national law of a country that it is automatically an extraditable offense. And secondly, if there is a bilateral extradition treaty, dapat nilagay din doon in the enumeration of extraditable offenses na yung trafficking is one of them. So, I think we have covered all the sensitive and crucial articles of this proposed ASEAN draft convention on trafficking. So if you have further questions or points of clarification, you please let us know. I will take a 2 seconds break to jump into another subject.
Lumalaki ang pamilya, kailangan mas malaking bahay. Umaasenso, kailangan mas magandang bahay. Kailangan pag-ibig.
May magandang balita ang pag-ibig. Dinoble ng pag-ibig ang housing loan nyo. Ngayon, 6 million na. Mula sa dating 3 million, na doble sa 6 million. At ang interest rate, ang baba na. Higit sa 30% ang ibinaba. Kasabay nyo ang pag-ibig sa pagganda ng inyong buhay.
Sa pag-ibig, ang pinaghirapan may katuparan.
Ako din po ay, I sit in the Board of Governors of the Philippine Ambassadors Foundation Incorporated. Kasi po ako ay naniniwala na talaga migration is not an emerging issue, it's a very real issue. In fact, it's the phenomenon of the 21st century. So, gusto po mag-participate ng Philippine Ambassadors Foundation Incorporated dito sa ating programa. So hopefully, yung mga kasama ko dito po sa Philippine Ambassadors Foundation, magiging guest po natin dito sa ating programa at i-share po nila sa atin yung kanilang mga naging eksperyensya kung paano nila minanage yung pag nagkakaroon ng migration crisis. Dapat po meron na tayong specific crisis management plan para sa ating mga migrante ayan po ay isi-share sa atin ng mga ambassador. And hopefully, sa susunod na linggo po ay i-feature natin dito ang ating dating ambassador sa Washington DC, very well experienced, nanggaling na kung saan-saan, sa China din and so forth, si Ambassador Willie Gaa, who is the legal advisor of the Philippine Ambassadors Foundation Incorporated. And in the same note, magkakaroon po ng roundtable discussion sponsored by the Philippine Ambassador Foundation Incorporated on the issue of migration, peace, and development. Kasi po, napansin ko na puro migration and development lang meron pong isang missing link na nawawala, yung tungkol po sa peace. Kasi po, it's not only a question of development, hindi lang po tungkol to sa pera, but to me, it is something about peace. And when we speak about peace, yung human dignity, sa palagay ko, ay something na hindi mo maaaring bilhin ng pera na ito. So, the Philippine Ambassadors Foundation, hopefully in cooperation with my former office, the Office of the United Nations and international organizations, will be hosting on International Migrants Day about a little over 2 months from now on June 7, which is International Migrants Day, a roundtable discussion on migration, peace, and development at the Summit Lounge of the Department of Foreign Affairs. We'll get the Department of Foreign Affairs to be recognized, of course, for all their special efforts. I know because I've been there, how hard, they have pursued the issue of the problems of the Filipino migrants, particularly our migrant workers. So, bantayan nyo po yan at sasabihin namin, in advance, i-warm up namin kayo tungkol dito sa roundtable discussion on migration, peace, and development. Bago po ako magtapos, gusto ko po sanang mag-comment dito sa itong project po ng European Union thematic programs on migration and asylum. Meron po yung European Union na thematic program on migration and asylum. Ang kanila pong project that involves the Philippines, ang pamagat po ay strengthening labor migration management capacities in 4 countries including the Philippines for replication under the Colombo Process member states. Ano nga ba itong sa susunod po na ating programa ay didiskusyon po natin yung Colombo Process. Colombo Process is actually a regional consultative process. It is a regional consultative process on the management of overseas employment and contractual labor for countries of origins in Asia. Kung tayo po, we are well known for the Manila Process on anti-trafficking. Ito naman po si Colombo. Colombo is the capital of Sri Lanka. It's a tiny island country down south of India. Is now known for the Colombo Process. Repeat po, Colombo Process is a regional consultative process on the management of overseas employment and contractual labor for countries of origins in Asia. So this will be our subject next session. But I'd like to say about very briefly on this project. Ito po ngayon na where the Philippines is involved and where Kakampi is involved and where the other NGOs and CSOs on migration are involved. It begins by saying that labor migration is an increasingly complex phenomenon as a result of a globalized market and economic and social disparities between labor sending and receiving countries. So we are mostly sending countries, and the receiving countries are generally the highly developed, the more affluent countries. The need for improved capacity of government and private recruitment agencies to effectively manage migration and to monitor recruitment practices is prevalent across the 4 countries I mentioned. Therefore, this project, which is going to be undertaken, it has it will begin very soon, and Kakampi will be participating. Let's see whether we can put up also a Migrants Resource Center. The aim is actually to contribute to strengthening target countries' labor migration management capacities. And having said this, maybe it's time to say goodbye. And to say we'll be together again. We will be one again next time. So, God bless all of you.
Career Ambassador, Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Republic of the Philippines too.